Hi guys, I'm Jessie, and today I am going to be telling you about all the books that I read in the month of September. September was a crazy month. I felt like I didn't read much just because I was so busy. Like, it was insane. Like, my daughter had track meets, and we went on vacation up to North Carolina to surprise my mom for her birthday, which actually I ended up reading more because of that trip, because it was an 8-hour drive there, an 8-ish hour drive back. And while we were there, we just kind of chilled at the cabin, and I got to like sit outside and look at mountains and read. So that was just like, I need that in my life all the time, and we need to go back already, but I digress. I ended up managing to read 6 books this month. One was a DNF, but that's okay. I'm still not 100% sure if this is a permanent DNF or if I may pick it back up in the future. We'll see. And I'm sure that you're going to tell me in the comments what I should do. Because, you know, people got some feelings about this book. This book that I DNF'd. People have some feelings about it. And sometimes people's feelings get a little heated. And that kind of makes me just not want to pick it back up, even if I might have picked it back up to begin with. So, respectfully, let me know your thoughts on if I should pick this book back up or if I should just leave it in the DNF on haul pile. Because honestly, I'm not real sure. And let's be real, some of the fandom has kind of put me off of it. But that's a conversation for another time. We're going to start off with some of the books that I read and loved, and I'll tell you about this controversial DNF at the end of the video. So I tried to dive into sci-fi for September. Sci-fi September, if you will. And it was hit or miss. I read some that I really liked. I read some that were okay, and one of my DNFs was also a sci-fi. The first book that I ended up reading in the month of September is one that I liked. I just did not love. I think I gave this like 3 stars on Goodreads. And that is Good Morning Midnight. And this is by Lily Brooks Dalton. This is a really short sci-fi standalone. Like, it took no time to read it. And there were a lot of really good things about this book. The way it was written is so atmospheric and beautiful. Like, I love the writing. It really immerses you in just like the setting and how you feel. And like, honestly, like reading this, it makes you feel super cold and isolated. We're following a couple of main characters. Our one is this like late 70s man who is a researcher, and he is up in like the Arctic Circle. And basically everybody in the world, something happens. We don't know what happens, which is kind of one of my issues. It's like, what happened? I don't know. Something happens, like a massive like event, and everybody is brought off of this like research team. And he's like, nope, I'm staying. And they're like, you sure? Like, you're never going to be able to leave? And he's like, no, I'm staying. So he stays. And then he's there with this like little girl who may or may not be a figment of his imagination. We don't really know. And he's basically just like solo living it, still doing some research, trying to contact people, not really knowing what's going on. And then we're also following this team of astronauts who are coming home to Earth from the first manned mission to Jupiter. And they lose contact, obviously, with Earth because something happened, but they don't know what happened. So they're just trying to kind of figure out like what's going on, and like they're trying to get home, and like he ends up making contact, and it's a very character driven, end of the world, post-apocalyptic feeling book, but it's not like a post-apocalyptic book in the way that I would normally read it. We have a lot of just unknowns, and it's very much just like about this man and then this group on a spaceship, and it has a very open ending, which I typically like, and I honestly did like the ending. It's just not one of my new favorites. My best friend, Monica over at Moody Reads, loves this book though. So, take mine with feelings with like a grain of salt. If you like sci-fi, if you like a softer sci-fi, this might be one that you'll really like. There's also a Netflix movie. The name is slightly different. I don't remember what the name of the actual Netflix movie is, but it's got, oh my God, what's his name? George Clooney. It's got George Clooney playing the old man. So they aged down the old man, I think, for George Clooney to play him because he is like not in his 80s. He might be. He is kind of old, ain't he? I don't know. But George Clooney plays the old man in the movie. And I still want to watch the movie because I did like it. I just didn't love it. Next up, we have a sci-fi that I did really enjoy, and that is Do You Dream of Terra 2 by Timmy O. This book was really good. This is like my kind of sci-fi. It is a little harder sci-fi, but it's following this like group of teenagers who have been like specially trained since they were like really, really young to go on this like first manned mission to this like new planet that's been discovered called Terra 2. And they are supposed to, you know, be the first people there and start to colonize it because they're supposedly like an empty world and it's habitable. And then they're going to be sending over more people. Well, they are going on this trip and something happens at the very beginning. One of the members dies that's supposed to go, so they bring in a second, like the backup team. So like one person from the backup team ends up coming. They're sent off into space with a group of like seasoned astronauts and then these teenagers. And it's again very much like character focused, not super plot driven. It's not super action. There is more action than say in Good Morning Midnight, but it's still a very, very character driven story. And I really enjoyed it. I liked the kids. Of course, I had some issues. Basically it's just the issues I had were like, why are we sending teenagers into space? And then it felt like these teenagers that had to go through all these like super rigorous like training and evaluations, like so much stuff slipped through the cracks. And you're like, I don't feel like this would really happen, but maybe. I don't know. So some of my issues were that, but like they were like really minor issues. I liked this book. It's a standalone sci-fi, and if you like character driven sci-fi, kind of isolated in space on this like long journey, I recommend picking it up because I had a lot of fun with this book. Then I ended up reading Leviathan Wakes, the first book in this expanse by James S.A. Corey. Again, I really liked this one. This is definitely harder sci-fi. Like, for sure. Like, this is what I think of when I think of, like, hard sci-fi. Right? Because it did take my brain some time to adjust. But I think as a typical fantasy reader, I didn't struggle as much as I thought I would with the, like, sci-fi elements. So that really helped me. I thought it was a really good sci-fi for fantasy readers to read because like I didn't feel stupid, which I'm not a science person, so that's something that I worry about when I read sci-fi, is I'm gonna feel dumb. But I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed all of our like characters and our POVs. It's kind of like murder mystery meets space with like a whole bunch of politics. And I know there's a bunch more books. And honestly, some of the stuff that happened in this, like especially near the end with some of the characters, I was like, oh, wasn't expecting that one to happen. So I really like some of the twists. We're following this one group of astronauts. Astronauts? I guess they're astronauts. Are they all astronauts? They're in space. But they're like running on like a gas freighter. So they're a water freighter. So they're taking water like around the galaxy. They end up getting attacked. And the few survivors like broadcast what happened. And it ends up starting like this intergalactic like thing. Like it basically starts a war. And then we're following this like old grizzled detective as he's trying to like solve this like person who's just kind of disappeared mystery that ends up leading back to our start of this war. And a whole bunch of politics, and honestly, I really liked it. I don't think I'm explaining it very well. I'm not good at explaining books, but I had a lot of fun reading this one. Next, I dove back into my fantasy comfort zone with some NetGalley arcs. And the first one I read was Hand of the Sun King by J.T. Greathouse. This is the first book in a new fantasy series, and I really enjoyed this. I didn't enjoy it at first. Like, I know that a lot of these like epic fantasy books start out really slow, but man, this one did not grip me in the beginning. I was like, I don't know how I'm feeling. I'm kind of bored, but the premise is really cool. And then I kept going and I was like, okay, I'm liking it. I'm liking it. I'm liking it. And then I ended up liking it so much that I gave it like 4 stars on Goodreads. So like if I'd have just read the beginning, I'd have probably given it like 2 or 3. But like, man, by the end, I was giving it 4 stars. So I really enjoyed it. We are following our character named Alder, who is also named Foolish Cur. He has like 2 sides to him. So on his mother's side, he is from a background of these people that have been colonized and like their magic has been wiped out. Their culture has been wiped out by this big empire. And then on his father's side, like his father is from this empire that is colonizing and like wiping out all his people. His grandmother is kind of like a fugitive, and so is his uncle, but she ends up kind of teaching him some of like his native people's magic at the very, very beginning before she disappears. Well, he ends up studying the empire's like way that they study, and he has to take this test, and he passes with flying colors, because like that's all that matters is passing this test, and that determines like your spot in society. Well, he ends up being what they call the Hand of the Emperor, which is the only people in the empire that are allowed to do magic. But he's still kind of like really looked down upon because of who his mother is and just his racial makeup. Everyone's like, oh, I'm not so sure about you. But he like works really hard, and he is a scholar. Like, he's not this like badass fighter. He is a scholar, which honestly is something I really, really liked about this book. And he ends up kind of just, you know, making friends with different people. And there's a whole lot of like, you know, death and war and violence. And there's like the tiniest little romance in it. And I actually really liked the romance because it was so minute and tiny and just not a huge part of it. And we just kind of follow him as he goes through these stages of wanting to be accepted by the Empire and, you know, what that means. And then seeing, like, you know, the greater world as he travels around, seeing different places within the Empire, seeing how the Empire treats the people that it conquers. And it's like, while he has always known this, seeing it as an outsider where it's not like his people, like, kind of really makes it sink home. And then it goes into, you know, rebellion and fighting the Empire and like turning his back on everything he knows. And it's just so good. And by the end of it, I was really, really loving it. But it did take me a bit to get into. The final NetGalley arc I read is actually my favorite. And I'm going to be doing a full review for this book because I feel like it's one that is gonna like super fly under the radar, that no one's really talking about, no one's really heard of. I think I know of like one other person that's read it. It's very few Goodreads reviews. I'm gonna be picking up a physical copy of this because I loved it so much. And that is A Dragon Bird in the Fern by Laura Ruckert. This is a fantasy standalone with some like heavily romantic subplots in it. But it's not a fantasy romance. It is definitely more of a fantasy murder mystery. And, you know, at first it sounds pretty typical. I thought it was YA. It's not. It's definitely an adult book. It's definitely a standalone, which is great. And, you know, I'm reading it, and I hadn't read any of the author interviews or anything like that. And our main character has issues learning language, learning how to write, and like she doesn't like to write and she can't spell. And I'm like, man, I'm reading this book and I'm like, she sounds dyslexic. I'm like, do we really have a dyslexic female main character? That is just something that I've never seen in like books in general, let alone like a fantasy novel. By the end of it, like, I read the author note at the end. Sure enough, like, that was the point. Like, I got it. I understood it. And there's, like, a whole, like, thing at the end about dyslexia and, you know, dyslexia in girls and women. And I was like, why don't we see more of this? So if you don't know, I think the reason this resonated with me so much is my 8-year-old is dyslexic, diagnosed with dyslexia. And it's, you know, it's a struggle sometimes with, like, school and learning. And we, you know, we get tutors that know how to work with dyslexic children, because you can't teach them to read and to write in the same ways as people that are not dyslexic learn how to read and write. Their brain doesn't function the same way. So there's, like, alternate ways of learning, and that has to be implemented, and we do implement that with my daughter. She gets help, and it's fantastic. And I really loved seeing that in this book, because our main girl, her sister is murdered at the very beginning of the book, and she's trying to figure out who killed her sister. Well, while she's trying to figure out who killed her sister, she ends up having to marry the man that her sister was supposed to marry, because she's a princess and he's, you know, a king of a foreign kingdom, and it's a very political marriage. Well, they don't speak the same language, so they have to have translators. And, you know, she goes off to her new land where she does not speak the language. She's relying heavily on this translator, but she does start to fall for this guy that she's married to. And even though they don't speak the same language, like, they make it work. And, you know, she's trying to learn the language, and she's really, really struggling with the tutor who's teaching her how to read and how to write in this language. And I love that it shows that. And then, you know, she's also trying to find out who killed her sister, because her sister's spirit is getting progressively more angry and violent and lashing out at the family. And at some point, the sister spirit is going to completely turn and kill the family if they don't find out who the murderer was, so the spirit can rest. And honestly, I loved it. It was so good. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. I think I'm gonna go back and give it 5. Just because of how I felt reading it and how much I enjoyed it. And I read this super quick. I read this in our trip up from Florida to North Carolina. I read it before we even made it there. So less than 8 hours. And I read it as a NetGalley book. So y'all, I really recommend this one. Pick it up. It's super, like, underhyped. I haven't heard anyone talk about it. And, like, I just want more people to read this and talk about it, because I think it has some really great representation of dyslexia in a female. And dyslexia in women and girls is very, very underdiagnosed, because you just look at them like, oh, you're just not trying hard enough, or you're, you know, you just don't get it. And a lot of times you get that you're not trying hard enough, which is not the truth. So I just, very personal, and I loved it. All right, now we're going to talk about that book that I DNF'd, that I may or may not pick back up. But honestly, the way I've seen people react to people that don't like this book makes me not want to pick it back up. So, if you can respectfully tell me why I should pick it back up in the comments, please go for it. If you're going to call me an idiot or whatever, just thanks for boosting the algorithm, babe. But I got thick skin, yo. It rolls right off. But if you want to be rude, go be rude to your mirror. So, the book that I DNF'd, don't know if I want to read and pick back up, is Dune by Frank Herbert. I made it 150 pages? Yeah, 150 pages. Y'all. It wasn't bad. And honestly, I feel like I just wasn't feeling it at the time. Like, I was kind of slumpy or whatever. So I was like, I'm just going to DNF it. I just wasn't enjoying myself, right? Then, one of my really good friends, Abby, I talked to her, and like, she put up a review video where she read the whole book and didn't like it. And then she just got brutally attacked in the comment section for her opinion on an old ass sci-fi book, because she didn't like it. That right there makes me like, I don't even want to finish reading it. If this is what people do to people who don't like the book. And I understand it's not just Dune. There's like so many fandoms that I enjoy that treat people like that. And I'm just not here for it, right? If somebody doesn't like a book, they just don't like the book. It is not a personal attack on you as a person for liking the book. I have some fantastic friends who don't like Brandon Sanderson, didn't like Way of Kings, don't like, the Miss Morin series, whatever. Okay, cool. We can still be friends. That's not a personal attack on me. You didn't tell me, like, I'm a bad mom and this and that. Like, you just said you didn't like one of my favorite books. Okay, I probably don't like some of your favorite books. It's subjective, right? I wasn't liking Dune. And the more I hear about it, like with my friend Abby's issues with it, we have very similar reading tastes. I honestly don't know if I'll like the rest of the book because of her issues with it. Because we have similar reading tastes, right? So I'm like, maybe, maybe not. I did, I Googled some spoilers. Because that's what I do when I DNF. I Google spoilers. And honestly, it just doesn't call to me. But I'm like, I still want to watch the movie. The movie looks really good, and I'm curious to see how they do it in this new movie. But y'all, the way my friend was treated in her comment section is deplorable. No one deserves that for disliking a book. I don't care if it's your favorite book of all time. I don't care if it's Dune, Way of Kings, Malazan. I don't care what book it is. If somebody doesn't like a book and their opinion is different than yours, just be like, okay, I liked it, but it's cool if you didn't, because we're different people. So, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I didn't like Dune. I'm keeping it to the side to maybe pick back up, but honestly, Alright, y'all. That was everything that I read in the month of September. And my little DNF rant about Dune, and my favorite book of the month, which was Dragon Bird and the Fern, that I feel like you should pick up. It was a good month. I delved into some sci-fi, which is way outside my comfort zone, I feel like. And I think I'm going to be picking up more sci-fi lately because I really enjoyed a lot of the books that I read. So, there we go. Your fantasy reader read some sci-fi and a little bit of fantasy. Alright, well thank you guys for hanging out with me. My name is Jessie and I will see you next time. Bye!